We'll open the Board of Selectmen meeting for today, December 5th, 2018. Before we go into the agenda, I'd just like to acknowledge two young gentlemen from Boy Scout Troop 10 here in Clinton, Kevin Zoll and Torrin Christie, who are here. There they are, they're standing up. If we can get a... Well, I guess we're keyed in on that, so you're not going to be on TV. But they're here observing the town, the selectmen's meetings in fulfillment of one of the merit badges. So they were very welcome and happy to see them here. And as I told them, when I was a young man, I was in Troop 10, so that they could end up on the Board of Selectmen someday.
Aim higher.
Welcome.
Or they could aim higher. First item on the agenda is public comment. Now, I will just say that I assume many people are here to speak about the tax classification hearing. There'll be an opportunity to speak on that subject during that hearing because it is a public hearing. So public comment, if you have a comment that you wish to make, not about the tax split or the pending tax rate, this would be the time to come up and have your say. Is there any public comment? There being none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the FY 2019 tax rate classification public hearing. And the first thing we'll do with regard to that is hear from the Board of Assessors, and Mr. Baird is here.
Welcome.
Welcome, Mr. Baird.
Thank you. Good evening. First, I want to thank the board for going forward and forming the tax classification subcommittee. I think it was a great exercise in understanding what goes into the process. And even though I've been doing this for 20 years, it kind of forced me to look at the bigger picture. Because a lot of the times we do this, there's a lot of computer-driven components to it, and you can look past the theories that were put into place when they originally formed these new laws back in 1982. So it was a good exercise, and I'm going to, hopefully, there's about 52 slides. I'm going to spare you many of them, which I originally put this presentation together for the committee, and it was much more math intense. So I was able to strip out a lot of that stuff and kind of just get down to the nitty gritty, so hopefully it makes it a little easier to follow. And I know that you do have a busy agenda tonight, so I'm going to kind of go through things fairly quickly. If there's something that interests you or you have questions on, please, by all means, stop me or ask me to go back to it. So the purpose, I think we can skip through most of this stuff. I think most of you are aware of why we're here. Ultimately, the goal is to kind of go through what's happened over the classification period and the revaluation of all of the classes. We'll look at some new growth, the general process as to how we got here. We're going to look at some of the surrounding communities. I know you can't see this very well from where you are. We set it up for the townsfolk, but I did give you a printout to follow along if that helps. And then ultimately we'll get down to voting on a CIP shift. So this year was a reval year, and once again there's a whole lot of information here which we don't nearly need to touch on, but every class of property was revalued over the period. In this case, all classes went up in some form or another. Land was relatively stable, but generally there was an increase in value on almost all classes, and some of it's significant. So like I say, we won't beat this to death so we can keep things moving. So here we are at the classification hearing. So requirements currently, the DOR since 1982 has been moving these things around, trying to find the best fit. I think we're probably finally stabilized at this, what we're seeing here, which is every 5 years we need to do a full evaluation. So like I say, that's where we are for 2019 right now. However, along that process, when it was a 3-year cycle, there was not a lot of interest in whether you stayed on track during the off years. Going out to the 5 years, it obviously made a lot of sense to say, well, we really got to make sure everything is still in on those off years. So we basically are required to do a mini evaluation every year. And if there's a variance of more than 10% in any class, that class needs to be examined and adjustments need to be made. Classification is just saying what a property is used for. Is it residential? Is it commercial? Et cetera. So that every year those are reviewed, each property, if there are any changes made to it. These are the 5 classes of property, so residential, commercial, industrial, personal property, and also open space. And we'll really, not a lot to talk about there, we'll get to that in a minute. So after the revaluation calculations are completed, we have values. Those values are submitted to the Department of Revenue for initial certification. Once that certification is issued, there's a public notice that's put out. This was a copy of what was put in the newspaper, and then it's also on the website. And that's up there for a period of 5 days of disclosure. Anyone can come in and inquire about their values, and also go to the website and look them up and see where they are. This is the report that's generated that gives a basic overview of where those values are for this period. This is 2019. Along the time while we're doing the values, we're also looking at growth. So growth is increases in the property values due to new construction, improvements previously not taxed, subdivisions, land divisions, new condominiums, new personal property accounts, or additions to those. Return of exempt property to the tax rolls. If a church were to be turned into something else, it would leave exempt and go to taxable. So how does growth affect the budget? Growth is an important element to the budget for us. So it increases the levy's taxing capacity. So outside of Proposition 2.5, with the increases we all know about, this gives you additional money to spend and keep the town running. Growth is formulated, in our case, by the 2 different rates. For the class, you analyze the value increase due to the growth, and then you apply the factor of the rate to that, and you determine how much growth you have going into the next year. Then once that's done, the growth is submitted to TOR, they review it, they run some statistics on it to make sure that it makes sense, and then they certify the growth. So we've been fortunate, even though we're small, we don't have a lot of places to go, we have had some considerable residential growth over the last couple of years. Commercial industrial growth had been slow, but it's looking a little better. We do have some projects that are coming up, hopefully that will be hitting the tax rolls in 2020, so that looks fairly promising. One of our big increases has been personal property. And those accounts are great. They add a ton of money to the budget, but they're also very, they're not nailed down. They're not real property. They're movable. So those accounts, as quickly as they can come to town, can leave town. So that's important to recognize that, at any minute those could leave town. So there's a whole lot of numbers here. Basically, all of these numbers are translating to this graph here, which makes it a lot easier to understand. So the blue line are sales over this period from 2003 to 2017, and the yellow line is days on market, so how quickly the property moved. So we go and we look at where we are now. There's a whole lot of properties selling very quickly. We go back to the heydays back here, there's a whole lot of properties selling very quickly. This was kind of the doldrums of real estate. This is what you want to see. You want to see this separation. You want to see a lot of sales with relatively fast sales occurring. So that indicates a strong market. This is just a historical look at the valuations that have occurred. And I think this is a great illustration for understanding why the rate, and people talk about, well, what's the tax rate in a town? It's relatively ambiguous. Because if we go back to 2002, you've got a rate of 1860 for a single rate. Now, for a single rate in 2018, we'd be at 1945. So there's a very small difference there, considering the fact that the levy went from 12 million to 25 million. So the rate is relatively meaningless. As long as the value model is kept up and they're accurate, the rate is just a factor that falls out of that equation. What I tried to do, and these are new slides here that you may not have seen in the past. We haven't really talked about it a lot. But we tried to distribute kind of where do each of the properties lie in a value model. So we talk about the average. We say we're around 266 this year. Well, that falls right in there. That falls right in with the number of the largest number of parcels. That's single family. Condos, kind of the same range. And the commercial and industrial ranges. Some of these larger ones, this is Nipro, and the Adams warehouses are the ones that are really large in there. So when we look at where we are today versus in our tax roll versus where we are in the sales roll, there's a fairly dramatic difference, and this is a good thing in this case. So our assessed values from 2017 sales, what we're using to develop the average value, this is off a little bit from the actual average. This slide was created probably 4 or 5 months ago, but it's close. It's only a couple $100. But our assessed values are based on the calendar year sale from 2017. So that's where we have to be to meet the 100% full and fair cash value. That's a requirement by the DOR. But interestingly enough, if we analyze the sales on MLS as they're happening through September, this is the average sale price, 302. So there's a pretty dramatic difference. So that's indicating that next year we will likely increase values again, at least for the residential class and perhaps some of the other classes as the analysis continues. So that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. Property values are going up, and if we don't do anything with the rate in the budget, you know, the rate will go down, excuse me, the shift in the budget, the rate will go down and taxes will follow accordingly. So what affects the tax rate? Taxable value of real estate, personal property, we knew that. Town meeting appropriations. This is really the biggest thing that affects the tax rate. If we don't spend money, we don't need to raise money. So that's probably the key element. State aid and charges are relatively constant, but they do change a bit. Local revenues, local receipts, exemptions and exempt real estate going in and out. New growth, which we talked about. Debt exclusions and overrides, also a very significant component. And then what the shift is selected at. So now there's some options here. In the past years, and this is my 20th presentation to the board, I've always provided you a lot of numbers, but I didn't provide you a lot of theories or things that are out there to potentially aid the process. So these are things that other towns utilize that may or may not be effective for us, and I think the conclusion will be they will not be effective, but they're worth looking at. So first is open space discount. Most of our open space is owned by entities that are exempt anyways. They're not paying taxes either way. This seemed like a great idea, but through my research, I found that only one community in Massachusetts has chosen this option. So it probably didn't pan out as the DOR had planned when they put this forward. The next is residential exemption. This one's interesting for some communities. What it does is it allows you to shift some of the taxes from the lower end properties to the higher end properties in the residential class. The only place this seems to be effective, and I believe there are, I had a note here, there are 16 communities that are doing this. All of them are either Metro Boston or on the Cape. So it pretty much lends itself only to vacation style communities or very dense metro areas. So probably not effective for us here either. Small commercial exemption was another, seemed to be a great idea, but interestingly enough, it doesn't benefit the business, it benefits the property owner of the parcel. So unless there's some consistency between those, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to adopt this. And I think most communities would agree, because there are only 14 that have gone forward and adopted this, and some have actually rescinded this in the short period of time. Which brings us to really what is adopted by communities that are trying to make some shift, and that's shifting the burden, which is why we're here tonight. So we know that we can shift up to 175% if we meet the criteria. We'll avoid all the criteria, but we do meet it. Communities that don't meet it can shift to 150%. And currently there are about 31 cities and towns in Mass that are splitting. That's changing, and we'll look at that a little bit further down the line here. So taxing authority, these are just kind of the concept of where the numbers come from. Fortunately, we're nowhere near the levy ceiling. Some communities actually operate at the levy ceiling. They're literally operating at the absolute max that they can spend. So we're at about $33 million, and our levy is at about $26 million. So we are fortunately well under that. The levy limit is what's calculated out previous year plus 2.5% plus growth, and exclusions and overrides gives you your new levy limit. Also well within that. So the levy is just the actual amount that we're going to raise. And then the excess levy capacity is the difference between what we could raise and what we are raising. So overrides and debt exclusions live outside the Prop 2.5 realm, and they're not subject to Prop 2.5. They are subject to the levy ceiling, but not to the levy limit. So overrides are permanent increases unless an underride is voted. So currently, we have a $1 million override. Debt exclusions are temporary. They do go away once the project is completed and the funding has been repaid. Things like that, we use those on our schools, Rauscher Farm Track, fire engine, sidewalks, and there's probably 4 or 5 others. So as they retire, those come off the expenses to the taxes. This is just kind of a list of who our top taxpayers, our top taxpayers have been in the last year, and there's 10 of them listed there. I think most of them you would be familiar with. They generally stay in that list. They may move around a little bit in place, but they're generally there. So now I want to kind of switch gears a little bit, because this was something that the committee was very interested in, which is exemptions. And I'm also very interested in pursuing this a little bit more. So I'm just going to briefly go through the ones that we have. So 17E is 70 plus or surviving spouse. The restrictions are assets. Everything in the veterans classes is a type 22, and those are based on percentage of disability. Blind is a certification from the blind office. 41C is the exemption we adopted last year at town meeting, and we were able to lower the rate to, the age requirements to 65, as opposed to the one that we've had for some time now, which has been 70. So there are asset and income restrictions on both of these. And this slide that I keep in my office here lists what those restrictions are, what the benefits are. And this is something that if people believe they qualify, we certainly would encourage them to come in and see us in the assessor's office, and we'll sit down and talk through this and see if they can fit these requirements. So some of the additional things that are out there are tax deferrals. So that allows you to not pay your taxes, and the town would record a recovery agreement, and upon your death, the town would recover the amount of money from the estate to cover the taxes. We have one participant in that. I think that we could probably have others if it were a little more advertised. It's not for everybody, as there is a lien against the property, and certainly people get concerned about that, and rightfully so. The senior work program, we have 20 positions currently, and the exemption is $750. So the Council on Aging manages the applicants and the job placement, and the assessors take care of the funding source for that. So currently at the $15,000 that we have available comes from the assessor's overlay. One thing I would ask the board to consider for next town meeting is actually doubling that. If we could look at going from 20 to 40 participants, we consistently have 20. And this year we had 24 applicants, and that's without advertising. So I spoke with the Council on Aging director, and she thought that if we could make that enrollment number larger, it would allow us to do some advertising and promote the program more. So I would ask that the board consider taking from the assessor's overlay $30,000 next year instead of $15,000, and we get another 20 people enrolled in that if possible, or at least give it a try. If they don't enroll, it doesn't cost us anything, but it would be a great opportunity to try that. Circuit Breaker is a state program, but it's working out to be quite beneficial. And I came up with the next slide is going to explain kind of where you could be if you met the requirements. So I'm just taking a married couple example here. You know, these numbers obviously could be higher or lower, could be single person, could be a renter. But if you're over 70, and let's say your income was $24,000, assets were $45,000. So assets excludes one house, one car. So the first thing what about my house? No, your house is out and a car is out. So many people that come into our office looking for tax relief certainly fall into that category. So if we just use the average tax bill of $4,278, and we use the water and sewer bill of $400, it's an estimate. It doesn't come into play for anything the assessors do, but for the circuit breaker, the $400 is part of the calculation. So if the tax were $4,278, you qualified for the 41D exemption, which you would based on those criteria, that would be $800, $810 off your taxes. If you were to do the senior work program, it would be another $750. You can do both of these together. And the circuit breaker this year for someone in that bracket would be $1,100, and that is the max, but you would still fall into that category. That could reduce your net taxes to $1,618. So that's a pretty dramatic number. And certainly there are many people, I've done many presentations over the years trying to get people involved in these. I'm taking it to another level. As a matter of fact, while I'm thinking of it, let's see what the date is. January 17th at 9 a.m. at the Council on Aging, we're going to do a presentation 100% on exemptions and talking about what's available. So anything the board can do to send people in that direction, some marketing for that, that would be great. And I'll have a similar presentation, but we'll take out all the tax stuff and just worry about the exemptions. And I think that would be a good program. Let's see if I can get the notes on this one. Also, maybe, I don't want to go subcommittee crazy, but maybe it might make sense to form a subcommittee to analyze exemptions. There are a host of them out there. I think we manage them pretty well, but they're constantly changing, particularly relative to veterans. There's been a lot of legislation either in the works or has passed. Most of those end up as local options. So if we were to kind of study that in the next 2 or 3 months, we would be able to, at town meeting, perhaps adopt local options on those that could be helpful. Okay, so basically, back to taxes. So how do we get the actual single tax rate, which is where we need to start? So we're going to take the levy, we're going to divide that by the value of all the properties, multiply it by 1,000, and we're going to get a rate. So that rate is variable, as we discussed before. So if the value goes up, the rate goes down, value goes down, rate goes up. That's a nice, great, simple calculation. What we do, though, is a little bit beyond that. So we're going to calculate the single rate. Then we're going to determine what we're going to shift that amount to the commercial industrial base. So once we do that, determine like we would do tonight, we determine what that shift is, we're going to determine how much the industrial and commercial and personal side pays. Once we know the dollar amount that they pay, we're going to subtract that from the levy that we've determined. Then we're going to redo a calculation to determine what the residential valuation rate is going to be. And then we're going to reconcile the whole thing and make sure they all add up. So where this gets complicated is we're not really determining. I think the shift, when we say we're determining we're going to shift 158% is where we are now to the commercial side. The concept is that they pay 158% and the other side pays something less than 158. But the sole process is to move that, to shift the rate so that it burdens more so on the commercial industrial base. So it's not a simple calculation. And these, when I say reconcile, these decimal places go out about 8 or 10 points to get everything to balance out. So this is all done. I have to go back and think about it because when I first became an assessor, you had to understand how this all worked. Now it's just plug the rate in or plug the shift in and the computer generates all the rates. So I've got a giant table that that comes up with all the different possibilities. But that's where we are basically. So now if we take a look at where we are, a couple slides here. Surrounding communities. So obviously we're kind of in the center of all of these. We're pretty comfortable at the 4,278 when we look at some of our neighbors. I just saw in the paper the other day, the Lancaster did set their rate, and they're looking at about a $354 increase on the residential class on average. So similar communities, and we could debate these all night long, whether they're similar or not, but in some respects I found these to be similar, and this goes back to various studies that we've looked at. So I think we're, once again, we look pretty good. Certainly Athol there is the outlier. I don't have any comment at that at the moment. So part of the subcommittee's goal was to analyze what towns are doing. So we did some research, and with some help from the DOR and going through some historical records, I was able to determine that all of these towns in red in the last 2 years have made at least a few point shift to the lower side. And then these other ones in the middle, in the blue, are articles that I found just by searching on Google as to what towns are actually moving in that direction. So in 2018, there were 3 communities that moved back to a single rate. In 2019, there were 3 communities. And then in 2016, there's a very good article online for Sturbridge going back to a single rate. Interestingly enough, this year, Webster just returned to the single rate. There's a lot of information as to how their thought process worked, and I'll encourage y'all to look that stuff up. But how did they do it was really my question, is what was the plan? So they had put forward a 20-year plan, and you can see that back in 2007, they were actually at a higher shift than we are today. And their concept was that as debt retired, they would use that money to go back against the tax roll, so they weren't re-spending the money. So by doing that, they were able to actually go down to in 12 years, get down to a single rate. Now, I'm not advocating that, I'm just merely pointing out that that's what's been done. So if we look at where we lie currently, we're at 158, so we're over here. We have 35 in our bracket. There are 242 towns that do not shift. I apologize for all the red stars here, but the DOR has not updated their inventory yet. They're supposedly getting there, but they're not there yet. But just for comparison purposes, and I know we say the rate's not really that important, but Longmeadow is at 24. Pittsfield has the highest shift I've ever seen. I don't think anybody's ever got to close to $40. And Weston is a very expensive place to live. So that's the top taxpayer last year. That's up there. These are historic tax rates and splits. You're familiar with those. So this chart goes back to 99. So before 99, it was consistently 175 all the way back to 1982. The shift had been stable at 175. And then there had been some movement, and the last few years we have moved down a little bit. So back to values, these are the trends from 18 and 19. The only thing really that I would point out is that even though land in general did not change, waterfront land did. There was a pretty considerable increase to waterfront land. In doing our research into this, it was very interesting to find that back in 1981, which is pre-classification, this is the certification from the DOR. The tax rate was $300 per thousand. And I thought that was very interesting. So I had to dig a little bit deeper. And interestingly enough, they have, whoops, wrong button, sorry. They had a school tax, and they had a general government tax. So I thought that was kind of interesting. What really makes it interesting is the average home value, when I pulled out all the data, was between $3,000 and $5,000. That was their assessed value. So when you do 5,000 times 300, well, that's $1,500. Okay, that seems like the right kind of tax. But this was for everybody, basically. So commercial, industrial, everybody had values in these low areas. So when Prop 2.5 was announced and adopted, they said, well, that's great. If we're going to have split taxes and we're going to have consistent taxation, properties have to be classified and valued to market value, which these properties were never market value. So next year, 1982, which is the first year of classification, I highlighted the yellow. So the interesting thing to note here is probably this, that the residential class was paying about 56% of the total burden of taxes in 1982. So if we move forward a little bit and look at kind of where we are today, the residential class is now paying 69%. So that's a pretty important shift. And if we then include personal property, which is extremely high right now, typically it's in the 5 range, 5%, and this year it's at 14%. If we take that 10% and put it up here, which will likely happen. You know, some business will move out of town and we'll get that back that we'll have to raise. That puts that almost at 80%. So there's about a 25% shift from who's paying the taxes. So some of those factors, I'm just highlighting them here. You know, I think the argument would be, well, when they leave commercial industrial classification, they typically end up in residential construction. And that's certainly a positive thing. That's a good thing. But there's also a lot of negative impact. So all of the properties that I've listed there have left commercial or industrial land use and gone to other things. You know, the real big ones are like losing Supernaut, which is a demo, which is now just a vacant lot, which is not valueless, but it's certainly very low. And Prescott Mills, great complex, a lot of people live in there, that's a good thing. But when they did that, it was done under a 121A agreement with the state, which essentially is a capped property. So their income is capped, which means their valuation modeling is capped. So you can't recapture all of that money that if it were just a free market rent. But losing all of those things from the commercial industrial side and heading those over to residential just burdens the residential side that much more. This is just basically showing us, we touched on the percentages, and this is what the amount of taxes that are borne by each of those classes with the total levy here. So in 2019, about 30% of the value shifted to 158, which is the CIP, would pay about 44% of the levy. So there's some disparity there, certainly. Levy calculations, as we talked about last year, there was no additional new growth. 2.5%, which is our allowed increase by the state. When we factor in new growth, we come up with a new levy. The $1 million override is already included in this. The debt exclusion is not, however, that gets added in. So this is our levy, maximum allowable levy, and this is the levy proposed currently. Okay, so now we get down to some taxes. So our increase for this year is fairly moderate, actually. $675 is not a large increase in the tax base. And if we were to maintain the 158 shift, we would be at 1576 and 2894. I tried to stratify a bit here, thinking that the board may go one way or the other. So I'll give you some examples. And this is an example of the impact to the residential side. Single family home on average. Now, when I say average, it's literally average. So to have a reduction of $78, some people are going to pay more, some people are going to be less. So the average is for that class, but what lives in that class? You've got colonials, ranches, splits, mansards, you've got all different types of property. Those do not go up and down similarly. It's whatever is interesting to the market right now. Those may go up more. It would be a deep dive of data to give you where all those things went. I don't think that's necessary. But on average, if we stayed at 158, if we stayed at 158, we would go from a value, average value 251,960 with an average tax of 4278, with a new average value 266,486. So that, staying at 158 would be a $78 reduction in taxes to the average taxpayer. And then I kind of stratified this a little bit with some predictions as to the previous values for the classes, for that class, but with the value spread. And then this is some actual impacts at these ranges to these 5 different properties here. I left the names off, but tried to kind of stratify them here from a very low valued property, which have had a tax at $4,858. And at 158, they're still seeing a fairly significant increase. We get up into the larger properties now. This is tax, not value. So that's an $816,000 tax. At 158, would still go up to 852. So there's still an increase on the commercial industrial side at the 158 shift. So this is kind of the slide that probably will help you make a decision tonight better than any. We can see that at the 158, the residential side would have a decrease, and an average property at the 266 mark in the commercial industrial side would have about a $186 increase. So I'll let you look through that and determine if that helps you make a decision or not. But certainly there's some interesting numbers there. And this was just some of the case research that we used during the classification committee, and a little more. So basically where we're ending up here in my presentation, we can adopt a single rate, not recommended. We can maintain the current shift, or we can increase or decrease the shift. And after that's done, the LA5 form is just a notification that the board has accepted the shift that I would submit to the DOR. And that's what I have for you at the moment. Can I answer any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Baird.
You're
Do
welcome.
members of the board have any questions for Mr. Baird?
No questions, Mr. Chairman, but I want to thank the Chief Assessor for the very comprehensive presentation he's made to the board.
I want to thank Dave, too. It's a very well put together presentation, so thank you. You've been doing it for quite some time. Just one question on page 22 here about the CIP represents about 30% of the value.
Yep.
And if the shift is 158, currently what it is now, they're paying about 44% of the levy, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions for members of the board?
You can open up for the
I am in a moment, but I just want to sort of make sure that I'm understanding. Mr. Baird,
Yes.
basically, where we are right now, at this moment, and nothing we do here changes this part, we're around $1 million under our levy limit.
I believe it's 1.6 million.
$1.5 million. So
Yeah.
we could, had we gone to town meeting with $1.5 million more in spending,
Correct.
we could have done that. So we're in good shape, we're under that levy limit. And as of right this instant, if everything remains the same, most residential taxpayers in Clinton will be paying less dollar amounts in taxes this year than last year.
That is correct.
That's also true, I think, even if the board shifts the split a little bit down. Not that I'm advocating that, I'm just asking that. So that was my only comment, and I guess I just wanted to sort of highlight that and make sure I understood it.
Sure.
If there's no other questions or
I
comments
have
from the board?
one question that your question raised. It's my general understanding from the time that I've been on this board that up until last year, we taxed at or within tens of thousands of dollars just under the levy limit consistently every single year.
Yeah, last year wasn't quite that close, but previous to that, it
Previous
was
to last
within
year.
thousands of dollars, yes.
Consistently, every single
Consistently.
year.
We had to. Yeah,
We were
we had to.
just barely balanced and just barely under the threshold. And last year and this year, especially this upcoming year, it's as you said, 1.6 million under the levy limit.
Correct.
Which is a huge, significant shift in the budgeting process for the community. And I just want to point out that it's my understanding that the bulk of that difference is from the personal property tax.
Correct.
Which can't be relied on to be consistent, but is a tax on the commercial side of the equation.
Correct.
And that benefit from the personal property tax has improved the financial structure of the town considerably.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Chairman, I would like to make a comment. I'm going to make it now, if that's right, with my fellow board members.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman and my fellow board members, I respectfully ask that you vote to leave the commercial residential tax rate alone this year. In addition, I ask the board to vote to put a non-binding warrant article on for the next town meeting to allow the voters of Clinton to have an input into whether or not the commercial and residential tax rate should be changed, especially to a single tax rate. A single tax rate would reduce the property taxes for the business owners and increase the tax burden on the residential taxpayers. I am concerned that we have failed to properly inform the residential taxpayers of this increase that the shift of the tax burden will have on the residential taxpayers. especially our elderly who are limited in fixed income. This Saturday, this weekend, I received a letter at my old house, addressed to my old house. It was not signed. It wasn't made out to me. The envelope was made out to me, but it was not signed. I just want to make that public. But it does show how the Christmas annual holiday party was, had an ad in the paper. And I support that 1,000%, and I thank Joyce for doing a job well done for the town of Clinton. And then also in the item shows the ad of the newspaper tax hearing. I can't even read that with my glasses on, but that's a priority. That's wrong. Mr. Chairman, my fellow board members, I believe that the report of the Clinton Board of Selectmen Tax Classification Subcommittee dated November 15, 2018, approximately 2.5 weeks ago, should be provided to the public and should be provided on the town website. It is my sincere belief that the composition of this subcommittee was overrepresented by business owners' interest and underrepresented by residential property owners. One of the main reasons cited by some of my fellow board members for shifting the greater tax burden from businesses into the residential taxpayers is to attract new businesses. However, I note that the tax classification subcommittee found that the data suggested local tax rates do not usually make or break the local economy. In fact, their own data showed that the property taxes came in 9th in the study about what factors attract new businesses in the community. The top 3 were parking, rental rates, and availability of qualified workers. Lastly, this same report states that this committee cannot find any concrete examples of the current tax shift hurting businesses in town. Increase in the residential tax rate, which will negatively impact the elderly, working-class families, and residential taxpayers with no data that supports that it will lead to business or economic development without the residential taxpayers' input is unwarranted, unjustified, and unfair. Therefore, I simply requesting that the commercial and residential tax rate be kept as it is this year until the people of the town of Clinton can have their voice be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sargent. This is a public hearing, so any of you who are here to speak on the issue of the tax rate and the split, if you would come up now, sit down, say your name and address, and then give us a brief bit of testimony, we would greatly appreciate it, sir.
Hello, I'm Michael Harding.
Could you come sit down, and that way you'll be able to be heard over the TV. And could you tell us your name and address, please, sir?
I'm Michael Harding. I live at 14 Lydia Lane in Clinton. If the gentleman there, David
Mr.
Sargent,
Sargent.
did not state what he did, that's exactly what I would have stated. But I wanted to say it from someone from a resident, especially the part that the changing of the tax rate for industry doesn't really make much of a difference for industry wanting to come in or not. And I think that anything that we do today, we must look 5, 10, 20 years into the future to see what we're trying to do and how it would affect everything. Raising the rate on residents, which we're predominantly resident, might break that. And I think we need to take a look at that too. Everyone needs to be paid. Things aren't free. I understand that. But we need to go careful. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone else? Yes, sir. The gentleman with the black hat.
Jeff
State
Swan,
your name and address,
132
please.
Franklin Street. I just wanted to comment on the fact that the proposal what's been presented, actually I have 2 questions. One, is it possible to get the slideshow?
Probably.
Okay. And 2, I had a second question to Dave. In the very beginning, you stated that there was a requirement that if the value of a particular class was outside of 10% of the fair market value, then it had to require you to do an audit.
Correct.
Right. How is it established that 10% of any particular class, given the locality, the specificity of a locality, is outside of a fair market value? You can't really compare a town to another town.
No, it's internal. So it's based on sales. There's a sales model that's developed. You analyze the sales model. If the sales are indicating that the assessed value versus the sales value are a disparity of 10% or more.
Oh, I got you. Okay, so
Yes.
it is an evaluation against
It's
yourself.
totally internal.
I got you.
Yeah.
I got you.
Where the only time you do external forces are commercial industrial properties.
I got you.
Yeah.
I got you. Well, the only other comment I wanted to make was, it does seem to me that there is a possibility here to provide a rebate to both the residential and to the commercial at the same time. The only one that speaks to the negative on the residential is if you made a dramatic shift. And while I understand the statement that it's number 9 on the list of things that attract commercial, that's only relevant if you actually can propose how you're going to fix the first 8. So unless there is a way that we're going to increase parking and we're going to increase the quality of the workforce, if there's a way that we're going to improve those things, then the statement of what's listed on the facts only applies to those things that you can adjust. If you can't adjust the first 8, then 9 could be the actual decider. So it is something to consider. I'm not making a statement that, in fact, this is the only thing that would attract someone, but as a small business owner in Clinton and a relatively new owner, this is actually a burden. It actually is kind of a pain in the butt. It is an expensive tax. It is dramatically more than what I paid when I was in Leominster. So it is a factor that I would consider in the future in terms of speaking to other people. No one wants to pay more for residents, I understand that. But there are compromises that can be accomplished that would make it a little better for everybody. And it would be nice to know, as a commercial owner, that you're not being the one that's being set upon to fund that number. In addition, the numbers that show that, where it says, oh, we're only paying this percentage, there's a question to be asked. Are we seeing a dramatic growth in the number of commercials coming in? Because if we're not, the reason why the burden is shifting badly is because of the fact that we're not attracting any businesses, which is creating a problem. It's a circular argument. We don't have enough new businesses, so the amount of tax that we're getting from business isn't going up, so we're going to tax businesses more, which is going to produce the same circular argument. At some point, you end up with no business, so you tax them 100% in an effort to try and make up the difference. There is a burden of responsibility here that everybody has to participate in, and that unless this is going to be nothing but a bedroom community, you do want to actually have some businesses here. We're not the enemy. We actually do provide some services to the town. That was it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
sir. Anyone else? Yes, sir? Come up, have a seat, say your name and address, and we'll be happy to hear you.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Board of Selectmen. For the record, my name is Roy Nascimento. I'm President and CEO of the North Central Massachusetts Chamber of Commerce, and our address is 860 South Street in Fitchburg. We are a private, nonprofit business association. We serve about 1,000 members of all sizes, but mainly small and medium-sized businesses, including businesses here in the town of Clinton. And I want to thank you all for your work in recent years to improve the town's business climate, both for existing businesses and for those who consider locating here. I'd also like to thank the town administrator and the entire staff of the town for their work in making economic development a priority. It's clear that Clinton is working to try to have a reputation for being open for business. There are a number of steps that a community might take to promote economic development. However, shifting the property taxes towards a single rate is among the most effective methods of illustrating that a community is truly committed to growing its commercial tax base. This benefits employers and it benefits residents alike, as a reduced commercial tax burden attracts further investment and creates jobs. A vibrant local economy also raises property values, increasing the borrowing power of local homeowners. And although some would argue that business owners can afford a higher levy, these taxes can prove serious hardship to local storefronts and even larger companies in the community alike. Competition from internet and from national chains has whittled away at the margins of Main Street establishments over the years, leaving their proprietors with less and less for themselves and their employees. And for larger industrial employers who face stiff competition domestically and abroad, a split rate is often a little more than an additional obstacle before those who might otherwise be attracted to this region's skilled workforce. Last year, the Select Board recognized these facts and voted to narrow the gap between the residential and commercial rates, and we would encourage you to do the same this year and continue that trend and voice your ongoing support for Clinton's business community. We look forward to working with the town as a partner in growth, and I want to thank you again for your time today. Thank you.
Sir,
Thank you.
I do have a question, though. Do you live in Clinton?
I do not, no.
Oh, you don't?
No, I do not.
But you want us to raise the residential tax rate?
We're looking for balance. You know, we're looking to reduce the residence
Where do you
rates
live?
by attracting more
Where do you live? I'm
businesses.
just curious, where do you live?
I live in Holden.
Holden?
Yeah.
It's a nice outfit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I
Thank
do
you.
think that the local Chamber of Commerce is welcome to testify here.
Thank you.
Any other
It's pertinent.
people want to have a say? Sir? Have a seat, say your name and address.
Hello, everybody. My name is Christopher McDermott, and as some of you are aware, I am the Public Affairs Manager for the North Central Massachusetts Chamber of Commerce. Like much of the region, Clinton is a community poised to benefit as the state's current wave of economic growth expands beyond the I-495 corridor. However, it is to take advantage of this looming opportunity, the town will need to enact policies that signal it is open to new investments and position it to compete with its neighbors. Perhaps the most important step this board would take would be to move toward, or continue moving towards, a single tax rate. Compared to the municipalities which surround it, all of which maintain single tax rates, Clinton taxes its business at nearly twice the rate of its homeowners. For many business owners currently serving the community, this is a significant and frustrating burden. Aside from eating away at their own income, this policy limits their ability to hire new employees and penalizes them for improving their properties and expanding into new ones. For business owners deciding which community to invest in, a split rate is often seen as a clear sign that a city or town in question views them with indifference. It signals that the community is unconcerned with their success or failure, unlikely to take their needs into consideration. Rather than making hard decisions, it makes them believe that the community's elected officials are simply going to appease their base and shift any burden over to the business community, which is unable to vote and often goes unheard. Worse, these concerns are cast in stark contrast again when nearby communities have enacted a common rate and made a concerted effort to attract entrepreneurs. While concern for the residential tax burden is understandable, implementing a split rate is an ineffective method of relieving it in the long run. As was just illustrated, such a policy discourages expansion and new investment. Any increase in revenues will therefore need to be drawn from the existing tax base, which is already primarily residential. If the town truly wishes to provide its households with relief, it should do so by encouraging and attracting new business. In recent years, this board has recognized that and voted to move gradually towards a common rate. You made it a priority to cultivate the town's business community and welcome entrepreneurs who wish to join it. Tonight, we ask you to continue this trend, and in doing so, create jobs, support local business, and expand the community's tax base. Thank you, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Sir,
Thank you.
Before you came up, the chairman asked you for your name. You have to state your name and address. You
Oh.
didn't state your address, sir.
My address is 17 Bauer Street, Lowell. Thank you.
And what town, sir?
Lowell.
Lowell, Mass. Thank you for testifying from Lowell, Mass. The Clinton residents really appreciate it, the people from Lowell testifying at
Mr.
their tax
Sargent,
rate.
this is a public hearing where we will hear from the public. We are not here to debate with the public. We are here to hear their
I'm not
opinion.
debating. He didn't answer your question, Mr. Chairman.
Anyone else like to testify? Sir, Mr. Friel. And sir, you'll be next.
I didn't know there was someone behind me. Well,
Welcome.
gentlemen, my name is Richard Friel, and I live at 406 Fernwood Lane at the Woodlands in Clinton.
Welcome.
Third generation Clintonian. 21 years ago, before David, I was sitting in that seat 21 years ago. And I am very impressed by David's presentation tonight. And the only thing I want to recommend to the board is to follow David's advice. This David. Whatever he says.
I don't give advice.
After 20 years of experience, and I still thank him for running against me and getting me out of that job.
Thank you, Mr. Frill.
He's a great guy.
Thank you, Mr. Frill.
Very
Thanks,
smart
Richie.
and doing a great job.
Thank you.
Much better than I could.
Yes.
Mr. Broderick.
Yeah, Mike Braddock, 19 Hill Street. I was, if you keep the tax the same way I'm listening, the taxpayers will get a break for once. You're gonna get a $78 tax break, then what's the, I don't understand this. You ain't gonna have industry in town. We're too far off the beaten path. Industry looks for it right on the highways, on and off. We're not gonna see, you ain't gonna see industry in this town. But if we can give the people that live in this town a break for a change. We just gave you a 2.5 override, what, 2 years ago, a year ago? And we got a chance to give the elderly, what you're gonna go up on your taxes, what they get on their social security won't even pay their taxes. So for once, give them a break on the taxes and keep the, if we get $1 million extra in the kitty, why are we going up on the taxes? Just, you know, it just don't make sense. It just, we spend, and you got a chance to help the people for one time, and if you know, you just turn your back on them. Just give them a break for once. Let's go down on the taxes 1 year and see how it goes. It's just, it's ridiculous. The way we spend money in this town, and we get nothing for it. The roads are falling apart. Everything is falling apart. But at least give the taxpayers a break for one time, especially the elderly, that they're on fixed incomes, because what they get for a raise, I talked to a few people that I know, what you people want to go, or Ford want to go up on a taxes rate, is their raise won't even cover their taxes. So you talk, they go, oh, to help this and help that. They're going to lose their houses. It just don't make sense. They won't be able to repair them. We should have go through the whole books and see if we really need the money. We must not need it. We have $1.5 million in kitty. So why go up in the taxes? Go up when we need to. Go down when we need to. This is the perfect time to go down. We got a chance to at least help them out. I think you should vote and keep it the same way till we need the money. That's all I gotta say.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Broderick.
Mr. Broderick.
Mr. Chair, I was wondering if Mr. Baird could clarify that. We don't actually have $1.5 million sitting in the kitty.
No, we did not raise the $1.5 million.
Right.
We don't have the million.
Just for points of clarification, we do not have $1,600,000 surplus that we're sitting on. The town and town meeting could have voted to spend $1,600,000 more than it voted to spend. We don't have $1,600,000 sitting anywhere,
Correct.
except in the value of the properties in the town, which have not been taxed. Anyone else to testify?
Could I just add to that, Mr. Chairman?
Certainly.
I want to make sure everyone in this room understands what the chairman just said, and the fact that that $1,600,000 difference between what we could have spent and did spend is potentially a one-time thing. It doesn't go on forever. It can change. It could increase to $2 million next year, or it could go away by $1 million or $1.5 million next year, because it's based on a surplus, not a surplus. It's based on a personal property tax that can move out of here tomorrow morning. So it's not something to be relied on or believe that we could raise taxes by that 1.6 and be stable next year.
Anyone else to testify? Going once, going twice? We're closing the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to leave the tax rate alone this year.
Motion's made to keep the tax rate as it is. Is there a second? For purposes of discussion, I will step down from the chair and second it. Is there any discussion on the proposal?
He's gonna run the meeting. He's gonna run.
Oh, go ahead.
Only for the discussion.
Only
of
for
the,
it.
Only for the
A motion's
discussion,
been
or?
made.
He's running.
Made and
Hold on.
second, an
Only for-
action on,
Only for the discussion, Mr. Solicitor, or for the rest of the hearing?
no, just for this.
He's the solicitor,
Just
he's the
one.
lawyer. Stand by.
Actually, David,
Wait,
I'm
sir.
running the meeting now,
He's the lawyer.
David. I'm running the
He's the
meeting now.
lawyer.
You listen to
I'm
me?
asking a
I'm
question.
acting
I'm not
as the
listening.
chairman. You
I-
don't have the floor.
I'm not listening
You
to
don't have the floor right now,
Mr.
David.
Solicitor, I would like your point of view.
Discussion.
Yes, sir.
Just for this one discussion on this motion,
Okay, go ahead, sir.
not for the entire.
Oh, gee, thank you, David. I appreciate your consideration.
You're welcome.
There's been a motion and a second
Yes.
to set or leave the rate as it is. I believe you intend to make it at 1.58.
Leave it alone.
The motion's
Right.
made and seconded. Is there any discussion? There being no discussion, all those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
All those opposed? Nay.
Aye.
The motion fails. Mr. Chairman, I turn
Okay.
the chair over to you. Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we set the rate split at 1.54 for the upcoming fiscal year, and I'll explain my reasoning if the motion's seconded.
I will second.
Motion's made and seconded to set the tax rate at 1.54. That is a drop of 2%. Is that right, 2%?
4%.
4%.
4%. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, under discussion?
Go ahead.
Oh, no, Mr. Chairman? may I?
Yes, you
Thank
made
you.
the motion, you.
Okay. First off, at that split, both the commercial side and the residential side the average taxpayer will receive a cut in their taxes from last year. At 1.54, the residential rate will be reduced, or the residential cost will be reduced by $30, and the commercial industrial cost will be reduced by $8. That sort of spreads the benefit out to both sides of the equation. But more important to me is that at one point in my life, I was a commercial taxpayer. I owned commercial property, and when I became aware of what the rate split was, it struck me as extremely unfair and disproportionate to business. If you look back at one of the other charts, you can see that the vast majority of commercial taxpayers are in the $200,000 to $300,000 value of property range. That's not big commercial businesses, the big bad corporations that we need to tax because they make too much money. Those are the mom and pop businesses that operate in Clinton. They're average people running a small business or renting their property to small businesses who end up paying the taxes. And they're vital and they're important to the community and the vitality of the community. One of these other charts showed a list of comparable communities, not necessarily abutters, and what their average taxes are. The only one that was lower than Clinton was Athol. And I don't think we want to be Athol. I don't think we should aspire to be Athol. I think we should aspire to be something better than that. And another item on that chart, Maynard, in previous analyses by the town of Clinton on payroll, on salaries, we had comparable communities. And Maynard always struck me, if you looked at all the demographics of the town, almost identical to Clinton. Similar sized schools, similar tax base, similar population, similar residential values. Maynard is almost, other than land mass, a duplicate of the town of Clinton, and they're paying almost, not quite twice, but pretty close to twice what we pay in Clinton for the same level of service. We get a bargain for what we pay here in town, and nobody that I'm aware of in the last 20 years has lost their home because they were elderly and unable to pay their taxes. On another chart, the assessor put up the opportunities to discount seniors' taxes if they were so inclined and aware of the discount. I'm unaware of anybody that has, any senior citizen that has lost their home because they couldn't afford to pay their taxes. If someone can correct me on that, I'd appreciate knowing it, but I don't like hearing it said when it's not true. I guess I'm done. I've been working on this since the first day I became a member of the board. I thought that the community should move to a single rate because that's what's fair to all taxpayers, not just one group. It's not giving a bonus to somebody and it's not giving a penalty to someone. And I understand that it has to be done gradually in order to make it palatable, but I believe we should do that, and I think the motion I made helps us go further in that direction. And I don't think it's punitive to taxpayers. If taxpayers want to lower their tax bill, the way they do it is vote no at town meeting, because that's where their taxes gets raised and appropriated and spent. Thank you.
Any other discussion?
I just have a
Mr.
question. So
Barrett,
we're moving at 4 points?
4%. Yeah.
So the recommendation of the subcommittee was 2 points. Now, we're even gonna put 2 points on top of that, so it's a total of 4 points instead of 2 points. Is that correct?
That's the
Correct.
that's the motion, yes.
That is, I will be voting no. That's going to definitely 100% negatively impact our elderly, our working class families, and our residential taxpayers. I respectfully will be voting no on this.
Any other discussion?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'd
Yes.
like to explain why the way I'm voting the way I am. Like Bill mentioned too, when I got back on the board 6 years ago, that was one of my goals to help the town get back to what I feel is a single rate, beneficial to both residents and businesses. I don't think, we're looking at the split tax rate and that's what it does. I think it's divisive, doesn't do anything good. All you have to do is drive around town and look at the commercial properties that are vacant. A few months ago, this town actually, we went forward. We approved a couple marijuana licenses to hopefully get that going. Now, I'm not saying we have to have, marijuana shops all throughout Clinton, but I think this is a thing that's going to bring in jobs. It's going to bring people into the community, people who actually, obviously, employees that they're going to hire. So it's going to bring more people in to hopefully shop and use our stores. But we have to be creative. We have to be competitive. There are other towns, mentioned earlier, yes, there are towns that have great assets that are off 495, 190. So that means we even have to be more competitive. We have 62 and Route 70. We have to be competitive. We just can't whistle past the graveyard and say, oh, well, we're never going to get this money back unless, let's not do anything. That's not good. If you look at the past 30 years since they put this into place, year after year, you can go over the years. It's the tax burden is being placed on the residential because when the businesses leave, the money's got to come from somewhere. It's not going to fall from the sky. So this money has to be made up somewhere, and it's falling on the residents. Now, we have multiple exemptions here in the town of Clinton, probably one of the most friendliest in the whole Commonwealth that I can think of. I don't know anyone that has 6 exemptions on there within their assessors to come down and ask for help. So again, and if someone has trouble paying their taxes, they have to, all they got to do is contact the assessor's office. I'm sure if Dave has any other programs there for if anyone came in and said, hey, I'm going to lose my house, I can't afford this or that. I'm sure there's something there as well, and maybe you can even explain that, go into it. But I do know there's obviously exemptions out there. The town just voted last year to add another exemption to it. I think this town is very exemption friendly. The businesses don't have that option. Again, we have to embrace the businesses that are here and hopefully attract new businesses. And there are a lot of businesses here that are mom and pop businesses. There aren't the big corporations that, everyone thinks they're just, reaping profits. And profits are a good thing. Every business needs to make a profit. They don't succeed. So we have to be creative. We have to help attract business here, help keep the businesses that are here now. So that's why I'm voting the way I am. I think this is a good thing for the town. Hopefully, we're going to attract more people into the town, more people to shop and use our businesses, and hopefully foster new business growth, and that's going to help our tax base. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other discussion?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. King.
In politics, it's very tempting to oversimplify things. Red states or blue states, my side's right, your side's wrong. Even President Bush, who was laid to rest today, his most famous declaration was, "Read my lips, there's no new taxes." I think when you're creating public policy, as Mr. Bush learned, it gets more complicated than black and white. And as I've said before, this town will never reach its potential, whether that's quality of life or fiscal stability, without a strong, resilient, robust business community. It's always been that way and always will be that way. We can't control everything. It's complicated. You're dealing with landlords, you're dealing with property owners, you're dealing with a fickle marketplace. You can't flip a switch and say, this will lead to this. That's why our subcommittee, it was such a frustrating task, because if there was a simple decision that we could make to bring businesses here and improve the tax base so that residents would get lasting relief, we would have made that decision. It's a simple thing, but it's not. It's complicated. So, yeah, maybe it's 9th on someone's list. Maybe it's 20th on someone's list. Maybe it's 1st on someone's list. We have to look at the things we can control. We can't move closer to 290. We can't move closer to a university. We can't get public transportation here, probably. What we can do are things like streamline permitting. We can more aggressively market this town. And we can tweak this tax rate to get us some real relief. I want as much relief as anybody else. But I look at the history here since 1982. From 1982 to 2000, we were at the maximum. The maximum, no wiggle room at all. Since then, 29 of those 37 years were within 5%. And 6 of the 8 years that are outliers were the last 6 years. Now, I'm not going to say that what we're doing this year is going to stick, because personal property is so transient. But if you look at from 1999 to 2018, for all of the relief we were giving taxpayers, those taxes went up every year. This is the model we have to be looking at. When we raise the burden that the commercial, industrial, and personal property is paying, taxes go down. The residential taxes go down. That's the math. If we spread this out better, that's the relief we want, not the Band-Aids that this gives us that makes for great campaign promises, but really doesn't change anything in this town. I mean, how have we changed since 1982? Has it gotten better? I would argue no. But look at what we've done in the past 5 or 6 years. That progress. And yeah, it's hard to point to it and say, this did this, yay. But we're on the right path. And this shows it. If this was a business that came in instead of personal property, that's something that sticks around. And that's a change that's going to stick with us. And that's real relief. I don't want to be, I think it's irresponsible, certainly inaccurate, to paint the people who are looking to close this shift as not caring about the residents or trying to put more of the burden on them. We're trying to take the burden off.
Exactly.
But just not in a year-to-year, hey, let's slap a couple $100 here. We're looking to change the town and make it better. And I think this will do it.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question for Selectman Kerrigan. You were on the tax classification subcommittee with Michael and Dave and the other guys. The recommendation was 2%. What's on the table right now is 4. Are you supporting the 4, not the 2? I'm sorry, go ahead.
When we made our recommendations, we didn't have these numbers. So, looking at, sorry.
Oh, my bad.
I didn't get it. I'm sorry, we didn't have the most up-to-date numbers.
So
I'm still not sure what's so funny.
Okay. So your recommendation, you were the publisher of that subcommittee report, and it said 2%. Now you're going to support 4% on the residential tax rate.
If you want to amend it, Mr. Sargent, I'd be happy to support it 2%.
Any other discussion? There being none, I'll just take an opportunity to say a few words. I do not support a single tax rate. It's sort of irrelevant because I will probably, at the rate we're going, be in the grave before we reach a single tax rate, but just to let you know, I am not in support of a single tax rate. The reason I'm not in support of it is that I think that this is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and not as some in power would, by their behavior, would have us believe, of the business, by the business, and for the business. I think that having a house where you raise your family and children is a more noble occupation than running a business. Not that I think running a business is not a noble occupation, but I think the survival of the race depends more on the former than the latter. So I am not in favor of a single tax rate. However, I do think that the current split in the tax rate in the town of Clinton is excessive. I think that contrary to many people's belief, we have, over the last several years, tried to do a lot to attract businesses. We've tried to make the town more attractive. We've had major renovations in terms of roads and sidewalks on some of the main streets, and we are going to be continuing in that endeavor. We are looking at a major revamp of our business district, which will probably be looked at town meeting this year, and hopefully will not rely much, if at all, on the tax levy. But we'll have to see about that. And one of the reasons we're doing that is not only, and let me say, we have added to our open space where people can go and walk over the past several years. And I think we do I am in favor of doing this to make a better quality of life for our residences and to make the town more attractive for our commercial and industrial partners. Recently, we had some people put a lot of money into the Old Timers to open that business. They're paying the higher rate as a result of the split. We have the Near East restaurant, the Mexican restaurant, and many other businesses that recently have been opening in town, and I think that they could use some relief. I think it's notable that the 4% shift gives everybody an actual cut in their tax dollar. So everybody will be paying less. Industrial people will be paying $8 less, but hey, $8 is $8. So I think this is the right direction, but over the long term, I would just say I am not in favor of a single rate, but I think that we are too high. So is there any other discussion? There being none, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
And opposed, motion's carried.
I oppose.
Yes,
Sorry.
right.
This is a scam, people.
Grow up.
Now, Mr. Baird has requested that we take a 5-minute recess so that he can recover, a 2-minute recess so that we can recover all of his, paraphernalia, which, as you can see, are substantial. So, with the permission of the board, we'll call a 2-minute recess.
Yes, sir.
Bill Plum.
Carry some stuff down.
That's your tripod and where's that going? Plug it or plug it?
I fear that's not the case. Yeah, he's going to volunteer for the exemption committee, so he's going to help us out. Take my act my anniversary is actually on that slide.
I'll talk to
And a single rate addresses first of all, they don't use the school, which is 50% of the population. Okay, so now you
They also don't serve in the military in the meantime.
corporations.
Corporations.
Kevin made us connected, I guess.
Yes, they are. Supreme Court.
You know why?
Talk about
Because
permitting during the markup
John,
stuff.
the first Chief Justice, who was John,
Yeah, I mean, no, like, they're gonna hopefully sign off on this. When I'm gonna get together before we do it, but,
John Marshall.
sure, I'll let you know.
No. It slipped my mind, but he said so. That's the only reason. But you did have this recent right-wing court live in infamy.
It's not recent. It's gone forever.
Big boy meeting.
For your lifetime and mine.
That will. I even would have voted for him to keep it at the same level, except he pissed me off.
Well, you saw the list of exemptions that are available to you.
Is there something else right here that I'm here for? No, you're here for yeah, Steve.
Hey, Ben.
We advertise that regularly.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
What's the matter?
We backed the truck up, man. I got some in the trunk, you know.
Won't be until,
Some about the 1.6 million we got hanging around.
okay, well, in June,
Oh,
we'll
listen,
reorganize after.
Terry and Gano would be up at the next town meeting saying, we should get that 1.6 million. He would.
Yep.
Excuse me for 1 minute. I gotta get dirty water before we continue.
All right.
I'm sorry.
All right, as soon as we can get everybody seated down.
And let's get this thing on.
I thought that, hey, everybody gets some money
Yeah,
back.
that's why I voted for it. I mean, no one gets I guess it's status quo.
Yeah. Billy's just going to get a drink of water. As soon as he comes back, we'll be back in business. Oh, he didn't hear, did you hear me? What's he gonna vote against?
I don't know. He's got control issues. Ridiculous.
But it's been busy. That's not a good thing. He has been busy.
Shows you the true character. I don't know. He's on the phone. He's on the phone. Here he goes.
He's gonna vote against everything. Here he is. You all set? We'll call the Board of Selectmen's meeting back into session. Next item on the agenda is the School Resources Officer Agreement, and we have Dr. Myers, the Superintendent of Schools, and the Chief of Police here, Mr. Levinger, Chief Levinger. So we will hear from them.
Good evening. Everybody okay now? Yeah, we have our memorandum of understanding between the Clinton Public Schools and the Police Department. We have a school resource officer assigned Monday through Friday during the school day at the schools. And you have a copy of the agreement.
Yes.
And unless you have any questions, we're just here to sign. I think Mike wanted us up here to explain what was going on with the officer. We have Officer Paul Sylvester up there. He rotates his time between the three schools. He's there for security purposes to do ALICE training to the teachers and practice drills in case of a shooting event and the unlikely event that something like that happens. But he's up there preparing. He coordinates with the police department and the fire department training, necessary training in case one of those events take place. He's also involved in a lot of other issues that come up at the school. He's been up there since, I think, the second week of September, full-time, and he's been kept very, very busy. He's doing a hell of a job. He's really embraced it, and he's doing a good job. I think the school's happy, and I'm certain that the parents are happy. Last spring, we had a forum at the school, and the parents really wanted this. It was something that they were very concerned about, the safety of the schools after the events that have happened nationwide. And it's a necessary thing with everything that's going on between the texting, some of the things he handles, threats over texting and sexting and vaping and everything else that's going on with the young kids nowadays. They're exposed to an awful lot. Like I said, he keeps very, very busy. He's not up there to be arresting people. He's up there to assist and guide people in the right direction.
I think that's a key point that you just brought up, is that the role of the school resource officer is not to arrest people, and it's really not even just to respond in a crisis situation, but really to be kind of preventative. A lot of these issues that there's such a gray area today of things that start outside of school, things that start on social media, things that go on, and then they kind of have some sort of ramifications in school. And a lot of times, without a school resource officer, you end up with, the people go to the police and they say, well, go talk to the school, or they come talk to the school and we say, well, you got to go talk to the police. And I think now it just allows us to handle these situations at a much lower level, because we're kind of all on the same team during the day. So I think that's a great one. And I think to echo what Mark said, I mean, this really kind of came out of that safety forum last year. I think that was really when we started looking at how we could kind of pull this together, and through our safety committee. And there was in the MOU, it does outline there's a small amount of money coming from the school choice account in the school district to offset some of the overtime charge costs, I think, that you had associated with, to backfill some of the for covering some of the weekend shifts. But I do want to say that this memorandum of agreement, memorandum of understanding, it's not like locking us into this forever. This isn't like creating a brand new position that needs to be funded forever. It's not one of those type of things. But it really is, we were able to make it work this year. We wanted to see how it's going to work this year. Next year's a different year. But if we're going to have an officer in the building, what we needed is a document that was outlining what their purpose was, making sure we're not saying, the intent is not to run around arresting kids. The intent is not around, to stop handling things with, the way we normally handle them and just turn it over to the police. That's not the intent of it at all. But the intent is to promote safety and to try to handle things at a lower level. So I think that, you know, this MOU is the model MOU that came from the state as they were trying to implement the school resource officers. And I think, you know, so far, it's been working for us. It's kind of been existing in this sort of draft version. We didn't want to formally sign it until we sort of had an opportunity. We've run it by the school committee. We wanted to kind of bring it to the selectmen, and then we can sign it so we officially have something on record. Like we said, it's not a binding thing that kind of, it doesn't necessarily say we have to do this forever. This year, next year's budget season will be another budget season, and we'll be looking at what was the effectiveness of this and what do we need to do going forward.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments from members of the board?
Chairman,
Yes.
I just want to say, Chief Levenger and Dr. Myers, thank you very much for coming in. I will be voting for this. I think it's a great resource for our schools. Chief, like you know, I got two great sister-in-laws. I got many sister-in-laws, but I got two that are principals, and they have done nothing but speak highly of Patrolman Officer Sylvester, helping them in the past with the DARE program and stuff, and I welcome this resource. I think it's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to say that I'd like to thank both the chief and the superintendent. I think it's a great proactive measure, and it's, you know, it's something not to be reactionary. So I think I want to commend you both for taking this approach. I think it's a really great idea. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes.
may, I support the MOU, and I congratulate both of you for initiating this and getting it into place and making it work. I do have one question. Does funding for this count towards local contribution?
I believe it does, because we have to report him as a staff member. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, I just was curious about that. Knowing that this is only, if you're covering this year, you must be getting close to thinking about next year. Do you have hopes for this position to be an annual thing? And I know it's very personality-based now, if he's working out well, but is there a structure in place to make sure that we're getting the right person? Or would we have to hire a different person if no one in the department qualified?
Well, I think there is some language that the state was very clear about in the MOU that kind of gave the superintendent and the chief sort of both the authority to look at the who the SRO was, so it wasn't necessarily strictly like a seniority thing, because they did recognize that sort of that you know, that rapport and the specific training is important.
Yeah.
You know, Officer Sylvester has had the training in the past and served basically he's basically served as the SRO. He just wasn't full-time in the schools. I think he's been doing a great job. He's really embraced the role. You know, there's some, you know, he was in the play last weekend, you know, with the kids. So, I mean, that was, you know, he's really, you know, taken to it. So I think that, you know, is it something we'd like to see be an annual thing? Yeah, I definitely think it is, but I think it's, like I said, it's a reality that, you know, every year we got to look at a budget, right? And so every year we got to see, and you got to make decisions, and they're all hard decisions. And I guess my only point of clarifying that is, this MOU is not like a permanent contract that cements this position in forever. I mean, it's one of those things that this is the guidelines that outline this position when it exists. If for some reason we have to cut it down to half a shift position or something like that in the future, well, then that's what it would be, but these kind of parameters would still be in place. So I think, you know, it's flexible. I think, you know, we both just want, I think, what's best, just as you guys, for the kids, for the town. And you know, I think right now this is a great step to try to help, and hopefully we can maintain it.
Just one quick follow-up. Knowing that, I know it seems like it has the support of this board, but if there are skeptics in the community, have you thought about how you would show the value? It's kind of a, well, there was, you know, no event today, so is there stuff baked in other than, you know, educational things, other than preventing a horrible tragedy? Yeah. Are there other elements to it that you could maybe point to people if they said, well, where are my tax dollars going here? Yeah, have you considered that, or?
Yeah, we've talked about it. I don't know that I'm sorry, Chief, but
Yeah, the officer keeps a log of all his activities for the day. He brings, he there's a law enforcement class at the high school. He coordinates officers to come in to talk to the class. We have officers go up for lunch with them. So it's, the students can see the police officer in other than being pulled over in a car for speeding or doing something like that. They can meet them informally and have lunch with them up there, and they're up there talking to classes. It's just not, Paul coordinates it with other classes, and he keeps an activity, a log of all his activities that he's doing up there, and believe me, he's a very busy man.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, he's, you know, training, talking about the dangers of vaping and other things. You know, he used to be the DARE officer. That's why he was selected years ago when the DARE program was operating. He was a DARE officer. He's been to the DARE classes. And informally, he was the school resource officers on call. And so if they had a problem, they would call him. And if it was on his day off, they would call him. And he'd pick up his cell phone and he'd be up there. Yes. And he was spending an awful lot of time up there, because there is, young people generally have a lot of activity, you know, with the police, you know.
I think in terms of data, we've talked about some of the things, and I think the log is a big one. That's one of the things we talked about, making sure we have that. I think at the same time, we have the log of the data that's his interactions, but then there are also a lot of events that happen during the school year that are reportable offenses that we have to report to the state every year. So we gather certain data on those types of things, and those can include things like bullying, assault, substance abuse, those types of things. So as we report those, we should be able to look at that as a sort of some trends. You know, like my stance on it, I think with bullying, this is a huge one, right? I think school resource, having worked in districts that had a school resource officer before, school resource officers help immensely with bullying, because typically a school would try to handle a situation, try to do something, and then it's tough for a school, right? Because it's hard for you to really kind of enforce Facebook. It's hard for you to enforce certain things you can control during the school day maybe, but not all the time. And then a lot of times, by the time you were getting the police involved, it was because you were now either something had happened or something, you'd hit that like breaking point, right? As opposed to when you have an SRO and you have that close working relationship and you have the person in, you can bring that officer into that mix right away. And now you can really try to work with the students and their parents to say, hey, this is where this can go, and we don't want to go down that road. And I think that type of thing is preventative. So I think what we might be able to do is sort of look at some of that data. You know, how many bullying instances did we report in this year, and this year, and this year, and those types of data. In addition to, you know, we're going to have the actual log of his work to say, you know, he's busy at work keeping these numbers down.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? There being none?
Mr. Chairman, I'll
Go
make
ahead.
a motion to approve the agreement of the school resource officer.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded to approve the agreement, the MOU with between the town and the school regarding the school resource officer. Is there any discussion? I would just like to say that, Dr. Meyer, it's nice to see you here 2 nights in a row. And you were at a subcommittee meeting last night. And this is, I think, the second MOU we've signed with the schools.
Yes.
And I mean, I think that, to your credit, we feel much more a partner with the schools these days. So I'd like to thank you for that. I intend to vote for this motion. Is there any other discussion? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
And opposed, motion's carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you too, Chief. But we see you all the time, so.
Yeah.
Not enough.
Not enough, right. Administrative business, we have a 1-day liquor license for the VFW post number 523. Did I miss something?
Liability assets.
Oh, I missed a total thing. Mr. Duffy. Mr. Duffy is here to discuss the liabilities to assets application review. And this issue we discussed last week. This is the program that houses that are in poor condition.
Thanks.
And so, Mr. Duffy, we heard from your cohorts last week. We'll be happy to hear from you right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to appear before you tonight. This is a continuation of a public hearing that was opened last week. I want to thank Steve Lipka from the Board of Health and Planning Board for pinch hitting for me last week. Mark Dowen from New View Communities, Liabilities to Asset Incorporated, you met last week. You may recall last week a program was described to you, a multi-community program funded by the state to address long-term vacant distressed properties in 5 select communities. This program will seek, after nomination by the community, to acquire and rehabilitate properties that have been vacant for a period of at least 3 years and that demonstrate at least 2 of 9 blighting conditions. These properties will be acquired, ideally through a friendly acquisition, and then rehabilitated and sold to persons making not more than 110% of median area income. When you consider that Clinton's median area income is approximately 94%, the region, this is to say that the houses will be sold to people who are very, very much in line with the cohort and the community. So we're here to continue the application, continue this public hearing, and hopefully obtain your board's endorsement. I believe last week the planning board's report was conveyed to you. The program originally nominated 18 properties, excuse me. 2 were removed, one because it was not vacant. There was a squatter living on the property, and quite frankly, that disqualifies the property from inclusion, potential inclusion in the program. I want to emphasize this program will not displace anyone from their home. These are long-term vacant properties. Approximately 40% of the properties on the list are bank-owned. And a second one was removed because the homeowner successfully challenged whether the property met 2 of the 9 qualifying blighting conditions. So the planning board voted with prejudice, voted to err on the side of caution and remove the property from the application. So with that, I'll allow Mark Dowen to speak, because I tend to speak too much. But if the board has any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions from members of the board?
Mr. Chair, I just think it's a great program, and I wish the best of luck with it, and anything, time to clean up properties, I think it's a good thing, so I think it's a really good program. Hope it succeeds.
Thank you, Mark. We see this really as just another arrow in the quiver. You know, we already have a housing rehab program that's funded through CDBG that helps income qualifying homeowners make repairs to their property. The Board of Health, working with the Attorney General's office, has been very successful using the receivership program to address some of these properties. This is another tool. It has a couple peculiar virtues. One is that, unlike the other programs, this program can afford to lose a little bit of money in rehabilitating a property. And the other is that while this program has the power of eminent domain, which is a very regulated procedure, it has the ability to clear a title if a property has a cloudy title and is inert and inactive for that reason. So it has those particular virtues, and I think is a complement to other things that have been going on in town, least of which is private initiative. People buying these houses, repairing them, and leasing them or selling them in a robust Clinton housing market is addressing most of these distressed properties, but there are a handful that are not getting off the dime, and this program is a way to address a handful of those properties.
Mr. Duffy, are you you're in need this evening of an approval of this project from the board?
An endorsement of the application, yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that this board vote to endorse the application.
I'll second.
Motion's made and seconded to endorse the application. Is that the same as approving? Yeah, same thing. It'll do, right? Okay.
Looking for you to endorse the letter.
Okay. Motion's made and seconded. Was there a second?
I second.
Motion's made and seconded to endorse the liabilities to assets program. There any discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'll tell Mr. Duffy what I told Mr. Lipka last week. I I think it's a terrific thing, and I know it's not the super sexiest program out there, but sometimes removing blight is just as good as bringing something new in, especially if you're in a neighborhood where it can be an anchor to the entire street. So I commend you, and I wish you a bunch of luck with this.
Thank you. And really, the credit goes to New Communities, Community Development Corporation at Fitchburg that has shepherded this program through. I just want to say a couple things. The 5 communities are Athol, Fitchburg, Leominster, Gardner, and Clinton. And I want to say, in addition, in Clinton, we will be using this program with extreme caution. The planning board basically voted to allow us 6 months for any property owners who are identified on the list to, begin to show progress on their properties, and also uniquely to Clinton, before any property is nominated to the program, the Board of Health and the Planning Board will have to sign off by affirmative vote at a regular meeting, which means it's an agenda item, it's advertised. So we understand concern about some of the powers that are given to this program, but we will be using this with extraordinary caution here in Clinton.
Okay, is there any further discussion? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
And opposed, motion's carried.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Congratulations and good luck.
Thank you.
We move on to administrative liquor license. A one-day liquor license is being requested by the Clinton VFW Post Number 523, and that is being requested in conjunction with their Fill the Jeep event that collects donated goods for holiday gifts to military personnel. What's the pleasure of the board?
Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the one-day liquor license for the Clinton VFW Post 523.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded to approve the one-day liquor license. Is there any discussion? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
And opposed, motion's carried. Moving into old and new business. The first item is Mass Development Environmental Assessment Grant for 172 Sterling Street. Mr. Duffy seems to have moved on. This is he's requesting support for a grant application to Mass Development that will provide funding to conduct an updated environmental assessment of the former Serpent property at 172 Sterling Street. Mr. Duffy.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, as you all know, I believe it was included in your packet in August, the town of Clinton acquired the old Supernom property, 172 Sterling Street, through tax title back in August. I think August 12th or 21st was the definitive date. That is in short, that is a property, a known contaminated property. It was well characterized when it was still an operable factory. There is contamination with zinc, also some volatile organic compounds, and small amounts of arsenic and chromium and nickel, I believe. Negligible amounts of those metals. But effectively, that site, now that we own it, we want to put it back into productive use. But before we can do that, the site has to at least be characterized and ideally cleaned up, whether it's cleaned up by the town or by someone we sell the property to. In any eventuality, this custodial chain of information needs to be reestablished. In the 9 years, I believe, that have intervened since the property was demolished, the monitoring wells, there were 34 monitoring wells on the site. Whether those are damaged or intact is not known. We don't know whether, now that the buildings are removed, whether and other conditions are just distributing some of that contamination in unknown plume, so soil samples have to be taken. And then we also are interested in also evaluating the zinc on site to see if it's basically a harvestable asset, that zinc can be recovered and sold to offset the cost of remediation, whether that is undertaken by the town or by a private party. Our purpose in applying for, so to do that, we're applying for funding from the Mass Development Brownfields Remediation Fund. The application is due December 14th. This would make money available to the town in a grant that is secured by repayment. Of the grant. We would repay Mass Development for the grant, but we repay them in this way. If the property was to increase in value, we would pay Mass Development 15% of that delta, the change in the value of the property before pre-remediation and post-remediation, until it was repaid, or for a period of, I believe, 30 years. So which is to say that if we get a dollar of new tax revenue from the property after it's remediated and put back in productive use, we would owe Mass Development 15 cents until the grant was repaid. So the Chief Executive Officer of the town would sign that application. I'm coming to you tonight asking you to give Mr. Jakonski the permission to sign that application. We'll be putting it together. We think we'll be seeking something on the order of $45,000 to $50,000 to reestablish monitoring on the site. That may not be the whole of it. These kinds of projects, from what I understand, tend to, you basically fund until you find what you got, and then you go ask for more funding to address what you got, what you find, because you're looking at unknown conditions in many instances.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion that authorizing you, the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, to sign the environmental assessment grant application.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded to authorize the chairman of the board to sign the grant application. There any discussion? I would just like to say that this property has been sort of a thorn in the town's side for many years.
Yeah.
And I mean, the first step was for us to acquire it, and so I think this would be very good. If there's no other discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
And opposed, motion's carried. Thank you, Mr. Duff.
Thank you.
The town of Framingham, this is also under old and new business, has provided a document to enter a procurement contract with the town of Clinton to bring street sweepings and catch basin materials for disposal at the Clinton landfill, and the contract is enclosed. And I assume Mr. Ward and the town council have looked at it.
Yeah,
Sure,
I
sure.
have it. If you could just, if you're gonna approve it, just approve it subject to any changes I may want to make. I need to clarify a few issues with the DPW superintendent.
We could actually table it until the next meeting if you would prefer.
I don't think we need to do that. There's some provisions in there I'd like to have taken out, so I'm sure it'll be through myself and Chris getting back to the town, to the city of Framingham.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we support the contract subject to modification by town council.
Second.
Motion's made and second to support this contract, subject to modifications by town council. Is there any discussion?
I'm going to be voting no, so you're going to be pulling things out of the contract, and we're going to finalize the contract now, but you're going to pull stuff out of it? I'm going to be voting no.
This isn't really, if you think about it, the stuff gets dumped up there every day. We don't have contracts, but since it's a municipality, they use their standard forms. They've got like insurance language, and they want us to have insurance for them and to indemnify them. I just want those provisions taken out. The rest of the provisions are just pretty straightforward. Those are just provisions I want removed. If the board wants, we can go back to the city, and then once we finalize, I can get back to the board. There's just certain provisions that I think we need to take out.
Yeah, I mean, would that fall into like catch basin materials and all that? Like, what is actually being dumped, I guess?
Yeah, I'm not really concerned about the material itself, because it all has to be approved. I'm just concerned about some of the provisions in the contract. They use their standard contract, like we would use if we were hiring a vendor.
Right.
I mean, we're a municipality, like they're a municipality. We're not gonna name the city of Framingham on our insurance policy.
Right.
So it's not gonna happen.
Yeah, we're not gonna insure them to bring stuff to us.
Right.
You know, so they're bringing materials, which is all acceptable materials, but they want, I don't think they want us, like I think Mr. Gibbons said, it's just a boilerplate contract that they use.
Right,
but
general
there are
form.
things that don't apply in our situation.
So you gotta go
There
through
are
and
other
clean it up.
towns that are bringing material here that don't require contracts. This
Gotcha.
city does. So we just wanna make sure it's advantageous to Clinton.
Right. In our best interest,
not to the other
absolutely.
communities, so.
Yep. Okay.
But all the material has to be tested, and it's on a list that only DEP can only bring in certain things, so, and it has to be tested and documented. So as Mr. Gibbons said, the material isn't the issue.
Okay.
It's just making sure that we're not
Right.
costing us money to provide
Right.
their provisions.
Gotcha.
The city of Framingham's not trying to pull fast. They
Right.
just used their standard form, is all they did.
Right.
They just, they launched it across to us.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Chairman, just under discussion, I just want to reiterate that I support authorizing the contract at this point and rely on town council to act in the best interests of negotiating any terms that he sees as uncomfortable for the town of Clinton.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion's made and seconded. We're under discussion, actually.
Just under
Any further
discussion.
discussion?
Just under discussion, thank you for clarifying that. I will be voting yes.
Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? Motion's carried. I removal request. This is a request from Crescent Builders. They are requesting agreement to conduct sewer system repairs in Clinton to obtain about 52,000 gallons of inflow and infiltration credits in order to construct a 40B development in Lancaster. So basically, the sewer system, which both Lancaster and Clinton feed into, there is a requirement, I believe, by the MWRA that we have a problem with inflow and infiltration. That is, holes in the pipes, damaged pipes, water flows in during storms, and there was a time that it would overwhelm the sewer treatment plant, and so we and Lancaster are required, if we're going to add 52,000 gallons, we have to provide 52,000 gallons worth of mitigation. If I'm wrong here, correct, jump in. So this fellow in Lancaster wants to build this project. The Lancaster sewers don't have any problems that would require the mitigation, so he wants to do the work here. Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Mr. Chair, that's essentially the situation. This builder has not provided a plan as to what he wanted to do or what he needs, or he appeared before the Lancaster Sewer Commission, and they indicated they needed to come back with a plan of how he was going to conform to the moratorium. So he made an inquiry to the Selectmen's office here in Clinton to see if there would be an ability to talk with the Selectmen about a proposal for them to do work in Clinton to get the credits that they need. So my intent tonight was just to bring the issue before the board to see if the board would want to invite this company in to make a presentation, if the board is open to this idea, or how you want to proceed with it. So I don't have any specifics other than he just indicated that he's looking for a way to put a plan together for the Lancaster Sewer Commission to satisfy their requirements, and whether or not Clinton, work in Clinton could be part of that plan. So the DPW said, we need direction from the Selectmen in order to continue those discussions.
We're in Lancaster and Clinton. Where are they going to build in Lancaster?
I believe it's off of Route 62, maybe near Deer's Road, in that area, up around there, so.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Mhm.
I'd like to request that we obtain an opinion from town council as to whether or not the town of Clinton can actually take an action like this if we were so inclined, and at the same time request that the person making the application appear before the board at our next meeting with a more definitive plan of what they'd like to do.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to check with town council as to the ability of the town to enter into this agreement, and to request that Crescent Builders meet with us at the next meeting to discuss it. There any discussion?
Just real quick, Mr. Chair, on the discussion, just for the notes here, for the minutes. I have concerns of 52,000 gallons of inflow of sewage. I know there's got to be some sort of MWRA regulations there, so I'm just leery about approving anything. So having them come in is a good idea, but I'm just expressing concern.
Yeah, I think that the 52,000 gallons in mitigation is as a result of MWR regulations, but we can discuss all that at the next meeting. I will say that we have done this before.
Yes, we have.
Well,
So, but anyway, any other discussion?
just under discussion, Mr. Chairman, I'm inclined to be supportive of pursuing this. it gets remediation done in Clinton, which would otherwise be at our expense or at a developer in Clinton's expense, and at the same time puts the development and the burdens of development in Lancaster. So I think it's a freebie. It appears to me to be a freebie for the town of Clinton. We'll get, I don't know if it's $1 million or $100,000 or what the dollar value is, but we'll get the benefit and Lancaster will get the traffic. So
Okay.
I'm
Saying,
fine
Bill,
with
too, that the 52,000 won't be counted against us for the town of Clinton for sewage?
their sewage won't be counted against us, but they will have to pay, the developer will have to pay.
Right, I know that.
Correct
Right.
the outflow. and we
My,
get
my
the
concern is the
benefit.
amount of gallons that's going into the
Let's
town
see.
of Clinton.
If I could explain. It's all a wash.
Okay.
The MWRA says if you're going to put up a building that is going to contribute $52,000, 52,000 gallons worth of sewage into the sewerage system, before you can do that, you have to do mitigation that stops 52,000 gallons worth of inflow and infiltration.
Leakage,
So
okay.
that there is no increase in flow to the sewage treatment plant.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
it's not a matter of goals or limits, it's a matter of you're putting 52,000 gallons in, you gotta take 52,000 gallons out. So, if in the future a builder comes in and wants to put up something that is going to add 20,000 gallons, once again, there'll have to be mitigation of 20,000 gallons.
She's
so
dealt with
that-
the water lines when it developed,
So,
became the same
yeah,
thing.
so that,
Okay.
whatever's going in is, the inflow and infiltration is reviewed. But anyway, we'll discuss that, I'm sure, if this motion carries at the next meeting. Any more discussion? What's the pleasure of the board?
Aye.
Oh,
Aye.
right, I'm sorry.
Conley's motion,
Yeah, all in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? Motion's carried. I'm trying to rush through the agenda here because it's getting late and I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, Traffic Committee reports of recommendations for speed notification signs. The Traffic Committee recently met and we discussed a number of issues and came up with some recommendations, which I'm sure Michael will be happy to go over.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Chairman. There are just two issues. There were a number of items that were on that meeting, but the Traffic Committee tabled several of the items for further study. There are issues that they need to do more review on. There were two recommendations. One that was in a listed agenda item, and another is an issue that came up under discussion at the meeting. The first is the speed notification sign locations, just suggestions to the board. It's final decision for the board, but there was money appropriated at town meeting to buy the solar post-mounted signs that will show a car their speed as they're coming into that area to see if they're in conformance with the speed limits. Well, hopefully, the intent is to get them to self-regulate to slow down if they're driving too fast. So the thought was to put these around some of the busy areas around town to try to help kind of ease some of the speeding concerns in some of the neighborhoods or some of the busy roads. So there are several locations there. The other one I'll just go over briefly. It's just on Green Street. There was a concern about parking on Green Street just from the corner from Chestnut, just as you go around that sharp corner. There were cars parking there. So the police chief asked to maybe consider no parking signs from the corner, maybe out about 500 feet. To the corner. I thought I put it in their packet, but I didn't. It said, so beginning at the corner of the intersection of Chestnut, about 500 feet down Green Street to keep that dangerous corner as wide as possible for traffic to get by. But going back to the speed signs, there are 6 that were purchased with the amount of money that was appropriated. They were able to buy 6 signs. So the thought was to put, recommendation was to put 2 on Main Street, 2 on Berlin Street, 1 on Water Street, and 1 on Chase Street. They're kind of longer roads in town where cars have the ability to pick up more speed. Some of the densely populated areas, a couple of those streets as well. So those were some of the areas both on inbound and outbound traffic for Maine and in Berlin. And then just only enough to do one side of Water and Chase. So we thought our Water coming down the hill from downtown, and you go down that steep hill, you start picking up speed as you're going by the housing authority. So try to put it in that direction around the housing authority to get people to slow down once they get to near the Pam's Place restaurant there. And the other on Chase Street was, there is the police chief said he's had a lot of complaints near the traffic, the bus stop area around Robert Memorial Drive. There's a lot of children that from the side streets and from Chase Street that come and congregate at that stop. So the thought was maybe try to put one there to get cars to slow down in anticipation of that bus stop. And if there are find out that it's a good thing, and there are some other areas that the board can maybe think about funding for next town meeting, if there are other locations that would be helpful as well too. But with only 6 signs, it was tough trying to come up with the right spots. But
Yeah.
This is some of the thoughts from the traffic committee.
Go pretty quick.
Mike, thanks, and thanks to the committee for working on this. The speed notification signs, I brought it to the Board of Selectmen last year, and we as a group brought it to the town meeting, and I'm glad it passed. The speeding in town is my #1 complaint. Maybe second now, besides the taxes, but is my #1 complaint, or second. Chase Street, Berlin Street, where all these sign notifications are going, are awesome. Has these signs been, have we bought these signs yet?
I believe so.
Because there's different signs out there, like, there's some communities up when I'm on vacation with my loved one, I'm up in New York, Maine, and then the speed notification sign tells you how fast you're going, but it's, if you go on the speed limit, it says thank you. I would really want a sign that says thank you. Thank you goes a long way. I said, well, there's different versions of signs, and I wish we had the committee brought that to the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, I'd have to check that,
Yeah,
I'm not
man.
sure. Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Thank you.
So, we have the traffic committee report so should we handle these separately? Speed notification, sign locations, what's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve both recommendations of the traffic committee.
I'll second.
All right, the motion's made to approve the speed notification sign locations and the no parking here to corner on Green Street. There any discussion? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
And opposed, motion's carried. Next item, under old and new business, is local guidelines for marijuana facilities. Michael, where are we on that?
Thank you.
Further information, thank the town solicitor for putting together.
Thank you, Robert.
Just some issues to review and to see if it's something that we can come to agreement on for any other companies that may come in to propose a marijuana facility.
I don't expect the board to digest that all tonight, but what essentially what we did is we had presented to the board, town of Shrewsbury had some guidelines it used, then the Cannabis Control Commission on their website had some guidelines it used. So we kind of took those and combined them simplified them, and came up with a proposed process for applicants for the town, for the town of Clinton. So it's pretty straightforward. There may be some information there that the board feels it doesn't need. There may be some information that it feels it does need. And so, if you want to review it and then get back to us, then we can finalize it maybe at the next meeting.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes.
just want to throw something out there for consideration, and I'm sorry for bringing it up at this late point in the process, but the thought occurred to me when I was wondering what the status is of the various licensees that we've approved or are in the process of being approved. And I was wondering if we could incorporate in this a requirement that they report to us on a quarterly basis of where they stand in the process of either construction or licensing. Because I drive by the places that we've, even every 6 months, just some way that we have of tracking where in the process the applicants are and when they're likely to open or be licensed.
Kind of like an opening day checklist type of thing where they're.
Right, just a heads up, every four months or every 3 months, you know.
I think it's a good idea.
We're in the midst of construction or build out or hiring or, just so we know what the future holds.
It's a good idea because we don't get that feedback. The only time we hear is when they need the hosted community agreement or the letter or a permitting board or a building permit, and that's where we kind of get our information as they're asking us for things, so we don't get that feedback. So, you know, there's one, we're just past, I think, the 2-year mark since the board did a host community agreement with one of the companies, and they're doing extensive renovation to the property, but I have no timeline really as to where they're going or when they're going to be opening. I have no idea.
And as they get closer, it would be helpful in budget forecasting for us to know, you know, next year they might be open and there might be tax revenue coming to the community.
It's a good point, and it's probably, think about it, it's probably something that we probably should not just only put here, but then put in the community host agreement.
Right.
Once we sign, that agreement requires them to report back, whether it's, you know, every 6 months. Of course, then it's enforcement. You know, when they don't, we're gonna have to reach out to them and say, you know.
Right.
So we may have to have some type of clawback in the community host agreement that.
If that's the appropriate place for it, that's fine.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring it up as a conversation item to see if it was something we wanted to have somewhere. Because I drive by them and I wonder where they are and.
Would we want to have like someone to, that actually go there, like the building inspector or someone from the?
No, it's more because it's also the licensing process that they're in that we don't control. It's where they think they are in Boston. And I think we should have a heads up of when that's coming or where they are in that process.
Mr. Chair, I don't disagree. I was curious too. The Cannabis Control Commission has a pretty good website, and the last listing they have of applicants that have submitted all required packets was November 20th. There's nothing from Clinton on there, so it seems we're still a ways off, but that's the best I could find.
It's, what they have to submit to the commission is quite extensive.
Right.
Okay, so basically, we'll be discussing this at the next meeting, but you have the suggestion from Mr. Connolly, which I don't think we need a motion. We can all endorse that. We'll be looking at that next time. Next item is goals and objectives discussion. Any discussion on goals and objectives? There being none, we have committee reports. And we have the Marketing and Communication Subcommittee. The Marketing and Communication Subcommittee would like to present their list of goals and objectives for review by the Board of Selectmen.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, as I've tried to keep the board up to date, we've met a few times and have formalized a list of 7. If you want to add the snow removal on there, that would be 8 of goals and objectives that members of the subcommittee either are passionate about or think it's a good idea. We split them up just for the general public. Marketing would be outward facing, trying to show off the town to people who might be interested in moving here or developing property or opening business. And communication is ways to improve the user experience for people who live here, either through the website or better advertisement of town meeting or election day and things like that. So it's, I think, a decent start, and I would appreciate the board's either critique or input or approval so we can move forward. I'm happy to go over the list too if you have any questions.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we support the list of goals and objectives for the Marketing and what's the name of it? Communications Subcommittee.
What do you mean support? I just want to make sure you guys knew what we're up to, and so we didn't, down the road, if we, I didn't want to surprise anybody if we were going ahead with this stuff. If you had any questions or concerns, I'll continue to update, but I didn't want to start down a path if the board was opposed to anything in particular.
Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Motion's made and seconded to support the goals and objectives submitted by the Marketing and Communications Subcommittee. Is there any discussion? Being none, all in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? Motion's carried.
Mr. Chairman, while we're still on Marketing and Communications Subcommittee, it was that subcommittee that gave us a very detailed report on the tax rate split that we've just concluded discussions on for this year. But I would like to bring it up as there was a recommendation in that report that the town, and forgive me if I paraphrase the wrong way, move in the direction of a single rate and do it incrementally, 2 points a year when possible. I understand that it's not binding, but I believe that was the recommendation of the subcommittee.
It was actually two-part. In addition to that, it was to try and maximize the exemptions, either exploring
Right.
new options, maximizing what we have, and publicizing them better.
Well then, I would like to make a motion that this board endorse as its policy the recommendation of the subcommittee, in both parts thereof, going forward.
I'm sorry, Bill, can you reiterate the motion?
I'm making a motion that this board adopt as its policy the recommendation of the subcommittee to incrementally move towards a single rate.
So it was a different subcommittee? just
It's a
to-
different
Oh,
subcommittee.
I'm sorry, I apologize, I thought it was a subcommittee.
I'm stuck on both, but
You got more than one?
yes.
All right.
Yeah,
All right,
it's a different subcommittee.
But
okay.
just to, you're bringing it up again, Bill, but the findings that they came up with, I seen it on Facebook, Selectman Kerrigan, you even admitted that there's mistakes in that findings.
Well, it was
You
points-
corrected them, but I never got new findings.
Well, anyway,
There's mistakes in
Mr.
it.
Chairman, I'm entitled to make a motion.
Yes.
The situation is moot anyway, because it's not the same subcommittee. And I think, correct it if I'm wrong, to accept a motion, to accept that recommendation, which is not on the agenda, would be problematic. I mean, if you want to
I
put
don't
it on
disagree
the
with that.
agenda
All right, then I respectfully request that we put on
for next week,
next week's agenda.
next meeting. That's just what I think. I mean, it's not on the agenda,
Mr. Chair, I agree.
huh?
I agree.
That's fine.
You know? Okay. So I mean, and I think if a member wants to put something on the agenda, they should be able to. So Michael, if we could put that on the agenda. Government Affairs Subcommittee. The Government Affairs Subcommittee would like to present their list of goals and objectives for review by the Board of Selectmen, along with a draft job description for the Human Resources Director position, and that information is enclosed. What's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to briefly touch base on, this is again similar to what Sean presented, the items that the Government Affairs Subcommittee is working on, and we want to make sure that the whole board is aware of it, and we give bullet points as to the items that are of immediate concern to the subcommittee and the things that we're going to be working on. Again, making recommendations to the full board as to whether or not they wish to adopt them.
Okay. So just for the, so what's the pleasure of the board with regard to those goals and objectives?
I make a motion to accept.
Second.
Motion's made and second to accept those. Is there any discussion? Being none, all in favor?
Aye.
And,
I oppose.
and one opposed. Motion is carried. Cable Television Committee. The Cable Television Committee would like to inform the selectmen that a YouTube channel has been created to carry video links to recordings of the town board and committee meetings that they would like to make accessible to the public. Mr. Kerrigan, that is your...
Mr. Chair, yeah, I just, it's something Mark and I have been working on a while, and thankfully it's come to fruition. I think it's a nice resource for people who don't have cable or cutting the cord, or who have a different setup in their house. or for people who want to go back and see what we've been doing. So I think the last maybe 6 or so meetings are on there. If you search Clinton Board of Selectmen on YouTube, I believe the channel is Clinton Mass, but it usually comes up at the top. And we'll, as soon as we get the new website up, we're looking to incorporate that kind of
There'll be a page,
functionality. Yeah.
cable page on the
Make it a little
website,
easier.
but I think it was something that the committee discussed and wanted to make sure the board was aware and okay with going this direction, since majority of the content will probably be the selectmen meetings. So just wanted to run it by the board and get any thoughts or opinions or comments on the direction we're heading.
Well, I would say I'm very much in favor of this. I mean, in spite of, the Board of Selectmen being on television and being reported in the local newspaper, you still have people who somehow don't know anything that's going on. And so perhaps those people, maybe they look at YouTube. I'm in favor.
I was pleasantly surprised with the feedback of the people who, like you said, didn't really know the scope of what we do here. So hopefully that clears up any confusion and maybe gets people more involved. Any bit helps.
Mr. Chairman, just, we're talking about televising and YouTube, I think that's great. But I do believe our finance department should be televised. Our finance departments are not elected anymore. They're all appointed or under the control of the town administrator or the town moderator. I believe those should be televised. I would like to have the town moderator to come in and maybe the chairman of the finance committee to talk about it and to start televising those meetings.
Yeah. As I said before, I think everything, to the degree that we can with the resources and personnel we have, I'd love to see everything out there. I don't think there's any excuse if we have the technology and we have the capability. They're open meetings, and I think more access is always better than less. So if we can pull it off, I'd be 100%.
I mean, that's the overall goal of the committee, to get everything on there. We just have to have
So
the
perhaps
resources to do it.
Maybe
Town
we could start out with
administrator
the
could-
finance committee. 'Cause that's the number one board. They control the money for the town of Clinton. They should be televised. They should be, 1,000%.
Okay, well, that,
Mr. Chairman?
go ahead.
Sorry, Sean. I was negligent in my subcommittee report. I wanted to make sure the board had seen the job description for the proposed Human Resources Director. This was prepared by the Personnel Board and the Town Administrator. And if the board was prepared to, I would like to recommend that the board accept it and return that information to the Personnel Board.
Mr. Chairman, I received my packet. I believe the email said 9 o'clock last night. I get up at 4:30 every morning to go to work. I didn't read my packet to the extent. I did work till about 4 o'clock today, came home, read it quick, got ready, and came here. I am not ready to vote on that. I vote no.
Well, there's no motion to vote on. What's the pleasure of the board with regard to the job description for the Personnel Director?
Mr. Chairman, there's no crisis or urgency in this matter. It would be nice to get someone on board for the first of the year. But if we need to delay it so that Selectman Sargent has an opportunity to read it and understand it, I would prefer to wait.
Okay, so we will take that up at the next meeting. That concludes the agenda
No,
for...
sorry,
Oh,
I just
sorry,
said one
you
thing. I
have
wasn't sure if
anything
it's old business or committee reports, but I was contacted by some people who were curious about, we had talked about a dog park subcommittee, and I know we had asked for volunteers, and I couldn't recall what we got on there, but they were just looking for an update if we were moving forward with that. I know there's support in the community, but not much else as far as what we want to do about it. So
I believe
said
that
I
we
would throw it
appointed
out.
the committee, right?
Yeah, there were just a couple of people. The board, we had a whole list of committee people the board was appointed, and just kind of pointed everyone that put in for it. There were only a couple of names. We're hoping, to kind of get more interest, so it kind of got put on the back burner. But the board wants those people to get started, and maybe
They
they'll
should get
generate,
started.
maybe they'll generate more interest on their own, then I'm happy to reach out to them and get started.
Yeah. Sounds good.
That's what I'm looking down here. Yeah, did we establish who's, am I on that one too?
No, I don't think
Well,
there
it
were
sounds
any
like
selectmen
it.
on that. No, there weren't, I think it was just citizens, I don't
So
think
you
there were
could be
any
if you
selectmen
want.
on the
Yeah,
board.
think it was
I got
just
some free
citizens
time,
if you
right?
like.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was just a citizen committee, I don't think there weren't any selectmen on that.
Okay. Well, I'd support you letting them move forward with
Okay.
it. Yeah. That's all I have.
One last thing, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I just want to request that the town administrator distribute the package that the facility director prepared for the subcommittee, knowing that the subcommittee hasn't discussed it or taken any action, but as information, so you could share in the direction and provide feedback to the subcommittee going forward.
Okay. We don't need a vote on that. I
No,
mean,
you
that
don't.
should
I
be,
just wanted to ask. if
just
that
want to
be
make
done.
sure that that gets distributed for later discussion. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Very good. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's made to and seconded to adjourn. Is there any discussion? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
And opposed, the motion's carried. Thank you very much.